Strong. I'm sure many of you know of him. He's going to be here talking to us today about nutrition and lifestyle strategies for HEMA performance. So yeah, take it away.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep, I hear you.
Yep.
All right. Yep. I am going to share my screen. I think that needs turned on. It says it's disabled for the participant.
Brent, I think you as host need to give permission.
Yeah, hold on. I'm trying to figure out. What the heck? Hold on. Okay. Can you try sharing now?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to let me.
Okay, cool.
All right, let me move. Oh, there we go. Can everybody see?
Yep.
My screen? Okay. We'll start from the beginning then. All right. So is it showing the full screen or is it still showing the slide view? Okay. Hold on.
Still showing the slide view. There you go.
There we go. Awesome. Okay. So you must all be seeing what I'm seeing now. So that's my title slide. I'm just going to start with a real brief introduction that just builds on what Charles said. I'm Chuck Gross. I am a nutrition coach. I have a bunch of certifications. I'm not going to bore you with them. They're related to nutrition and sports performance. If you're not familiar with my story, I used to be over 400 pounds. To date, I've lost 200 pounds and kept it off. It's like 12 years now. And I did that through sound nutrition and weightlifting. And I was a software developer for 15 years, and I had an opportunity that I could go do something that I was passionate about, and I took it, and it's been a wild ride ever since. So if you're not familiar with HEMA Strong, what is it? It's a Facebook community of about 2,900 people. There's a blog, a YouTube channel. We do some coaching online. And it really just started in 2017 after 2017 Capital Clash. A bunch of people, found out what I did, and they started asking me a bunch of questions, and then I was getting the same questions. So I said I should probably put all that information somewhere so I can send it out. And that just kind of snowballed from there. It was like an accidental thing, really. But our mission statement is to help martial artists with their goals while being supportive, inclusive, and encouraging that's open to everybody that wants to follow those rules, that is. So why am I here? Nutrition is challenging. There is so much misinformation out there. News reports that the science around it changes every day, and that's not necessarily true. But it's also human nature to look for that one weird trick or that fast, easy approach. But it's my passion to dispel those myths around nutrition as well as training and make that information that's a little bit more straightforward and accessible to everybody. So as part of that, I do travel around the country for my job. And I also try to go to HEMA tournaments and talk about this type of stuff to anyone that's willing to listen. All right, so our agenda for today is these four main topics: health and fitness facts, nutrition 101, just a basic overview, lifestyle strategies, and then tournament prep specifics. So before we get started, I did want to mention that I'm going to be discussing diets and calorie counting. That type of thing doesn't work for everybody. So if that's not something that you'd like to hear about, this may not be exactly the right context for you. Because for many people, talking about this stuff can lead to like an obsession with healthful eating. So my number one responsibility and priority is speaking to people about health, nutrition, and training in a way that fosters a healthy relationship with their food in a body positive way. Especially, I'm incredibly sensitive to that, being that I spent most of my life over 400 pounds, and now I'm learning to live as somebody that's not. The most important thing here going forward is I don't want to just stand here and talk about slides the entire time. So if you have a question about something that I'm currently talking about, ask it. I don't care if you interrupt me. I do much better with this when I'm talking to people instead of talking at them. So in many ways, the skeleton of a thing to talk about is just a way to start that conversation. If you have questions about something that's not relevant to the topic at hand, but you think that I can answer for it, at the very end, I'll stick around for any questions you want to ask me about anything. So just to summarize, just if you have questions, interrupt me, ask them, and I'd rather talk back and forth about it. So, all right, let's get started with the health and fitness facts. So a third of Americans follow diets, and in this case, it means some type of restricted eating. Many people do it for different reasons. Most of them are for health, weight management, or because they want to feel better and have improved energy. And 80% of people, I would say this is probably even more than that, there's conflicting information about what foods to eat, what foods to avoid, what's good for you, what's bad for you, and people just have no idea what to believe because they just doubt everything. So when you ask people through surveys, like what do you blame for weight gain? Some people blame carbohydrates, some people blame sugar alone, some people blame fat, some people just said it's everything. And who's right, who's wrong, not really a relevant question yet. So what I did was, when I was starting to build this presentation, I went in HEMA Strong and I asked, what type of diet do you follow? And not necessarily some type of restricted eating in this case, but just like what principles guide the way you choose your food? Some people said paleo, some people said keto, some people said Whole30, some people like intermittent fasting. And one of the more popular ones was, I like meat and I like whiskey. And I couldn't really argue with that. So what is the best diet? It's not a diet. It's just eating better. And the thing I like to say is dieting is temporary, nutrition is forever. Whatever you're doing when you're paying better attention to food, it should not be restrictive. It should meet you in the middle, meaning it should take care of your basic needs for nutrition, health, wellness, longevity, but also be something you can actually do. Because if it's the perfect thing and you can't do it, what's the point? And in many ways, the best diet is something that's measurable, meaning you were able to objectively look at the data and draw conclusions from it about what to do better or what's not working. So in this case, I'd like to reframe diet just to mean what you're eating in a given day. Let's see. Okay, I see some things in the chat, so I'm gonna stop right there. Okay, the meat and whiskey option. Yeah, it's really easy. You just eat meat and drink whiskey. I highly recommend the meat in a smoker though, if that's the case. Smoked whiskey and smoked meat. So I want to include this quote. This is from a friend of mine that also runs a popular fitness group on the internet, and much of what I learned about running a group, I learned from him. And he said, it's entirely possible to love your body the way it is while still wanting to change it, wanting to lose weight, get bigger muscles, get stronger, some other physical change. It's not an indication that your body, that you hate it or that you have anything to be ashamed of. You can love yourself, love your body, and still seek to change it or improve it in some way. So I'm going to dive into Nutrition 101. Like I said, if you have questions about anything I'm mentioning, just shout it out, raise your hand, post it in chat. I'm going to see if I can move the chat over to the side. Yeah, got two monitors, might as well use them. All right, so this is about energy balance. And the context of this is in relation to improvements in performance and body composition changes. So we're not just talking like, this is not about weight loss. This is what matters for changing your body composition and what matters for health and performance, because there's a lot of carryover between those ideas. So energy balance, this is a simplification over a very complex system that our body does perfectly, is that if you are using a certain amount of energy in a day and you're taking in that much energy from food, everything kind of stays stable. If there's a disparity, meaning the amount of energy coming in is far greater than the energy being burned, then that's an increase in stored energy, which is weight gain. And if the opposite's true, you're burning or using more energy than you're taking in, then you lose stored energy and you lose weight. So this pyramid is really important, and this is the relative importance of what matters when it comes to your food. So at the very bottom of the pyramid is calories. So that's the actual total energy you're getting from whatever you eat in a day. So as far as performance goes, many people want to look at, okay, well, what supplements do I need? Or what about water loading and making sure I'm hydrated? Like, yes, that matters, but until you actually start at the bottom of the pyramid and work your way up, the relative effect is very low compared to the previous step on the pyramid. So then macros, and what that means is that's pretty much food choice. You have certain needs physiologically for maintaining muscle mass, recovering from exercise, having energy, and macros in this case just refers to having the optimal amount for yourself. There are some minimums. You wouldn't want to go below those. And then you have some optimums. And most people live somewhere in between. And the only big reason we want to pay attention and be aware of this stuff is just to make sure we're covering our bases and operating from there. So suggestions regarding macro percentages. That's a great question. In general, because everybody's different, I don't like the idea of percentages. Your protein needs, and I'll dive into this a little bit more, but your protein needs kind of scale based on how much muscle mass you carry. Everybody has, a certain amount of fat that you would not want to go below, because you start to run into issues with your brain health, your joints, your sexual health. All that stuff is related to your fat intake, because that's your hormones. And then carbohydrates are almost like a lever. Like once you take care of the minimums for protein and fat, the carbohydrates fill it in based on your activity level. So the percentages can kind of are not specific enough to individual needs. As far as somebody that's just starting, I think it's a good place. I've seen things like a paleo approach would be like 40% protein, 30% fat, 30% carbs. And I've seen in some cases where that comes pretty close. But the problem is that they don't really scale the percentages. So like, for example, your protein would generally stay pretty consistent, but as your activity level gets bigger, so must your calories. Therefore, that you don't want to raise the fat, because past a certain point, it's not going to matter for performance and energy levels, but you'd want to raise carbs instead. Hopefully that, programming that into MyFitnessPal, it does use percentages. So there's, depending on, if you have the free version, you have to use that. If you're tech savvy, there's a Google Chrome add-on called Food Fast Fit. It allows you to actually manipulate them directly to the numbers you want. And I think that's a feature of premium. I use MyFitnessPal, but I don't want to pay for premium, because I'm thrifty like that. So
How would you go about calculating your base caloric intake if you're trying to get an average to start your restrictions?
I do have a slide that talks about that, so I will get into that.
Cool.
And if I don't, please yell at me. I will make sure I answer it. I'm like 99.9% certain that I have a slide that covers that exactly.
Okay.
So, and then since we covered like calories, macros, timing is just like, okay, how many meals feel good to me to have consistent energy throughout the day? Do I need 3 meals, 4 meals? Some people like the idea of like one big meal. And that's really kind of personal preference. When we start to get into the extremes of human performance, the timing matters a little bit more. But for most people, that's why it's so high up on the pyramid. Composition and macros are almost intertwined. You can cover your macro bases, but you can not make the best food choices. So composition is like a spectrum of food choice, meaning, for example, I've seen somebody that I set them some macro goals when they're a client of mine, and they were able to hit them successfully. And they did that with a pound of turkey breast and a box of Girl Scout cookies. And that was the only food they ate for the entire day. And, I was like, I'm impressed. That's amazing. But at the same time, is that best for your health and feeling good and getting all the vitamins and minerals you need? No. So that's where composition comes in, where there's some better choices without demonizing a food as good or bad. So that it's just kind of like that spectrum of sliding scale between choices, where as long as you have the balance, it's not something to super worry about, which is, again, why it's so high on the pyramid. And last but not least is supplements and hydration. And I group those together because you get water from your food to begin with. So as long as you are taking care of drinking regularly, and as far as hydration goes, everything counts. Everything, anything you have, even you've heard maybe the rumor or myth that like coffee dehydrates you. It's one of those things where the magnitude of the hydration or dehydration is overstated. So like the caffeine may dehydrate you slightly, but then the effect is covered up by the fact that it's also made with water. So, and like supplements, there are, entire companies built on selling supplements, and there's only a couple that really matter. And they're not certainly requirements, and that's just based on like possible blood work and things like that.
this might play into composition a little bit. I was doing a little bit of reading, and I admit to being out of the nutrition game for a minute, but there was something along the lines of the energy in, energy out might not be as solid of a model as everybody thought, simply because the composition of the caloric makeup of the average Western diet is so heavily simple carbohydrate based that we're just not seeing the nutrient benefits that we need to in order for their bodies to adapt adequately to the energy and energy out.
Yeah, it's so like this is a gross, you know, pun intended because my last name is gross, simplification of the way it works. When you like dive into it, food composition can change your body's reaction to like how much energy you're using. So like, for example, if you have, you know, simple carbohydrates, lots of sugar, you'll get a crash of your blood sugar, and then you'll be less likely to be moving around and have a thriving metabolism, which then like down ramps the actual energy you're using in a day. So you become efficient at using sugar and burning through it, but not having a bunch of energy. So like your metabolism gets lowered. So they're not like just an equal sign. They're one of the symbols where I think it's an equal and then the two less than, greater than, to show that it's a multi-directional relationship, that they affect each other. And even since we're on food composition, different foods have a different cost to actually digest them. There's that whole thing of like, you know, celery has negative calories because it takes a lot of chewing to eat it, and then that burns all the energy. And no, that's not true, but the spirit of it is that like protein is much harder to digest. Therefore, it takes more energy to digest than say like something like, you know, a fat source. So like it's the energy balance equation is simplified to talk about it, but when you expand into it, it's like, this is really complicated and there's no way to accurately measure it like precisely for an individual on a given day, because it's so dynamic and it changes every day.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So this kind of ties into what we were just talking about. These are the 4 ways that our bodies actually use energy we bring into them. And this is important because if you don't understand this relationship, you may focus on things you can't control or things you can't change. So for example, the big and the circles are relative to their effect. So the biggest circle is basal metabolic rate, and that's just the calories or energy you would need if you were just sustaining your current body size while laying in bed all day. So that is the biggest contributor, and that has to do with the size you currently are, your height, your weight, your age, all kinds of other, some of them are genetic and, you know, things you can't really directly influence. So the next one in our order of portion of your metabolism is NEAT. That's basically just movement that's not exercise. The fitness industry loves these great abbreviations, but it's just anything you're doing while moving that is not like a scheduled, I'm doing this for 1 hour and then I'm not doing this. So it's all the steps you get in a day. Like you've heard like parking farther away at a grocery store, you know, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. It even applies to situations like how much you blink or how fast you blink. When we look at some of the studies being done with like stage bodybuilders, when they are dieting down to be on stage, the leanest they could possibly be, they start to like blink slower, and some of them like almost stop blinking because their body, like, this is so ramped down that they just don't have any movement as a way to conserve energy. And those are some of the ways we talked about with the energy balance. Is super complicated because if you have less food, you move around less. Most people do. That's a genetic thing. So that's where we're starting to unpack a little bit how complicated that can actually be. Okay, so calories burned through exercise is just called exercise. And that's just anytime you're doing something where you're moving consistently for specific reasons. So that's our HEMA practice, that's running, weightlifting, anything you do in the gym, any of that stuff. That would be exercise. And it's a very, you know, there's all these fitness devices. You know, I have one too, I have a Garmin, and they tend to give us these ideas of like these crazy amount of energy burn for it. And most of the time they're really way off. You know, I have a treadmill that tells me I burn like 900 calories doing a 2-mile run or something. And it's just, you know, that it's just not, there's no way. It's very minimal as far as in comparison to the other ways we use energy. And the last one is thermic effect of food, and that's what I mentioned earlier, like simply chewing and digesting the food. Certain foods cost more to digest, and that's where food choice can come into play and how that impacts the actual energy being used and the energy coming in. Any questions about any of that? Alrighty. So into the big picture stuff, our macronutrients are protein, fat, and carbohydrates, and our micronutrients are vitamins and minerals, and both of these things come from food. So what is protein? It is amino acids. We have ones that we need to sustain life. Those are essential, and then we have non-essential amino acids. What does that do for us? It's for the growth and repair of body tissue. It's helps you stay full, and it has, it's part of creating hormones and enzymes. The energy it provides is 4 calories a gram. If you have an excess of it, it just turns into the same type of sugar in your body that a carbohydrate does. So past a certain threshold of like your body can't utilize anymore, you just use it for energy. And it's usually found in meat, dairy, and soy products. And that's the meat in meat and whiskey. So carbohydrates, it's
Sorry, question.
Yeah.
So your essential amino acids for protein, those are only animal-based, correct? The non-essentials are plant, or is it a mix of two?
It's a mixture of two. Fully plant-based diets can be deficient in some of them, and if anybody's eating plant-based, you should probably make sure you get some type of legume, like that's cooked, like a chickpea or some type of peanuts, because they provide one of the essential amino acids called lysine. You can't really get it besides legumes in a plant-based diet only. So that's one thing just to be aware of. But plants do provide essential amino acids. And if as long as you're not eating from one food like the entire day, like just to give you an idea of like if somebody were vegan, if they were only eating like bananas and oranges, they would run into the issue of not having a complete amino acid profile in their food. But as long as you're eating from a variety of foods, it really shouldn't matter, as long as you get something that has some lysine in it. And if you're a Jurassic Park fan, that's the amino acid that they had. Yep, I'm glad someone recognized that. That's the amino acid they had to give to the dinosaurs in the original Jurassic Park, or they would die without it. So they had to supplement lysine in Jurassic Park. So, see. All right, so carbohydrates, essentially all carbohydrates, you have simple ones and complex ones. They are just turned into sugar in our bloodstream, and different sugars go to different places. It's what our body prefers to use for energy. Eating carbohydrates spares muscle tissue, but so does protein. It helps with digestion and optimal health because of our gut bacteria. It's 4 calories per gram also. And when you actually, so the idea is when you take in protein from food, you store that protein as muscle tissue. When you take in carbohydrates, it fills up your liver, and then you store that sugar inside of the muscle tissue with water. So it makes muscles look bigger because there's stored energy inside the muscles. So in many ways, it's fascinating because the food we eat is stored as those same types of tissues, and there's different energy systems. So like, we'll talk about that when we get to fat, but there's like a correlation between the food itself and how we utilize it for energy. So carbs are mostly found in grains, fruits, vegetables, and junk food. So so there's always the demonization of carbs are bad. No, carbs are good now. No, carbs are bad. They are not essential to sustain life. You will not die if you don't have carbs, but they are the preferred source, and they are required for optimal function. Your brain needs at least 25 to 30 grams of carbs to function, and if it doesn't get it from food, it'll start to take other body tissues and convert them. So, but they're not evil. Fat is lipids, and as I mentioned earlier, you need that for immune system function, you need that for sex hormone production. Certain vitamins you can only absorb into your blood if you have fat in your diet, so it's definitely required to take in. It's a concentrated form of energy. It's 9 calories per gram. and you can store unlimited fat if you need to. And it's stored in fat tissue. And we get the most of it from animal products, nuts, oils, butter, things like that. Again, fat is not bad. It is easy to overeat, but it's not bad. You need it, and you will shut down functionally if you do not get enough of it. Micronutrients are vitamins. There are some that are water soluble, and there are some that are fat soluble. All that means is if you take too much of a water soluble vitamin, you'll just pee it out. Like if you've ever taken like a B vitamin for any reason, and then you're just going to the bathroom and it's orange, like that's you getting rid of the excess you don't need. Fat soluble means that it's stored in your body until it's needed. If you take too much of it, then it could be a problem, but that's usually not a problem for most people in the Western world. And then minerals, that's pretty much like your stuff you get from salt, like sodium, potassium, and those all come from plants as well. So the idea here is that if you are concentrating on a whole food diet that has lots of nutrients, is you want to focus on foods that are ingredients as opposed to foods that have ingredients. And again, that's without demonizing foods that have ingredients, because there's balance. It's not just like only do this or you should only do this. There's that balance aspect. And a variety, as I was saying, helps make sure you get nutrients in every category. If you are choosing to be in a calorie deficit, you may want to look at a multivitamin, but I'm not really able to make specific recommendations. I don't recommend supplements at all unless you have a blood test with your doctor that shows you being deficient in something. All right, so there's a question about avoiding processed foods. No, there's not really a need to specifically avoid them to be healthy. Foods are not like, with a couple exceptions that we know are bad, like things with trans fats. There's no food that's good or bad in isolation. It's the context of the entire day and then the entire week. And it's really a baseline of, have you met all of your basic needs for nutrients, macronutrients, vitamins, and minerals? And if so, and you still have excess energy you need to get from food, you can consider that discretionary. So once the bases are covered, the health and performance effect of filling in the remainder of your energy with whole foods versus processed foods, the difference is so minor that the adherence and your ability to keep doing that matters a lot more. So many people are shocked to hear me say that. We're like, I'll be at a HEMA event and they're like, oh, we're going to get pizza. I guess you don't want to go. And I'm like, I like pizza, and pizza should be part of a healthy diet. Maybe not every day, but like, it's just, bread and tomato sauce and cheese and probably pepperoni if I'm ordering, like, that type of thing. So there's nothing wrong with processed foods. It's just you just want to prioritize covering your bases first and then fill them in as necessary, as like a trade-off a little bit. You're welcome. And that said, the big thing is, if something that you eat something that doesn't make you feel good, doesn't matter what the purported health effect is, just don't eat it anymore. And that might sound like silly to say that, just don't do it. But it's one of those things where, so I've worked with people before and they feel bad about like not being able to eat cauliflower, because some people have problems with like the gases from like cruciferous vegetables don't sit well with them. And it's like, that's okay. It's like, you don't feel well eating it. There's no gain trying to force it on yourself just to get some vitamins and minerals from it. It's not that important. All right, so how do you balance all this stuff, especially if you care about body composition and performance? So it's possible. You just have to kind of pay attention to what affects what. So like if you wanted to lose weight for some reason, you may have to accept that performance may temporarily suffer. You may have a little bit less endurance. You may gas out a little bit sooner, and that's just something to be aware of if that trade-off is worth it to you. If you want to build muscle, and that usually involves gaining weight, that's one thing of your performance is probably, it may temporarily improve, but it also past a certain threshold might decrease as well, simply because you'd be adding extra weight and you haven't yet learned how to move that around and you're not as efficient at it. And then if performance is your primary focus, just everything's good, I just want to be able to go faster and stronger and fight better, then If you have body composition goals, then they should probably be entirely secondary or not even a concern. So each goal, the thing why I'm laying these out like this is that each goal is going to require different amounts of food, typically. So that means you have to eat less energy. For one, you have to figure out where your settling point for maintenance intake is, or you have to like be in a surplus and go through that process of figuring out how much you actually need to enhance your performance in the gym or whatever activity you're doing to create muscle. And the way that I recommend doing that, this all sounds like a lot, and I recommend this the same way that I talk about how do you deal with, like, if you want to be in the gym and fighting and training and participating in tournaments. It's a periodization, and what that means is don't try to do everything all at once. Focus on one thing for a short period of time, and then reevaluate and line it up with some type of schedule that fits what you're trying to do. All right, so this was, I believe, Marlene, you were asking about this part. What are some general guidelines? There's all these different formulas out there, and the funny thing is, if I were to take someone's statistics and the information they would provide and say, hey Chuck, can you tell me what my macro should be exactly? If I were to take all of your information and run through a couple different formulas and put all the results next to each other and then use these, they come out pretty much the same, like 9 times out of 10. So rather than go through all that math, that's really not that interesting. These are probably good places to start. So the BW here stands for body weight. So whatever body weight you're at, body weight times 10 to 12 for weight loss. Maintenance or performance are 13 to 15, and then muscle gain is 16 plus. And those are ranges because everybody responds differently. We all have genetic components to our metabolism. Some people are moving around all day and they get like 30,000 steps as part of their job. Some people are office workers and they're in chairs all day. So all those things kind of matter, and these are just starting points. And the only real way to put this into practice is adjust them based on what happens. So if you pick one of these numbers and you start there, and the scale and body weight measurements and your clothes all feel the same, you probably found out what your maintenance requirements are. And the same goes in either direction. And these are just a basic guideline for nutrients. And, there are going to be outliers to here. So for example, when I was 400 pounds, obviously these would not have worked. So like I wouldn't have been eating 4,000 calories to lose weight, but these are general guidelines. And if you're looking at this, I can make sure everybody gets a copy of these slides too, if that would be helpful. And then if you have questions about that afterwards, please ask. I'll be able to help you with that. So Peter's asking about, sometimes you hear eat like the person you would like to be. Yes, that there is some scientific merit to that, in many times if you have like an ideal body weight or body composition, that once you get there, you'll have to eat to maintain that. So there's two sides of the coin to that, meaning like if you had to eat that way the entire way, you may have to deal with a bunch of things that pop up, because there are going to be challenges anytime you try to change anything about your lifestyle or your eating habits. It's not just all smooth sailing, right? So if you change everything immediately to be like that, you're going to get a lot of resistance up front. I like to view it as make small steps towards that, because then as resistance comes up, it's just one thing to deal with at a time. And that's usually what happens if people try to change too many things at once. They end up changing nothing. On the actual like energy needs, if somebody were an outlier, like I would have been at 400 pounds, looking at their body weight for their goal weight, and so instead of having it be their current body weight, you could plug in their goal weight into these equations, and then that may give you an idea of what maintenance would look like at some future goal, if that answers your question. Awesome. All right. So what do I eat, right? These are just some really quick examples of whole foods that hit all of the macronutrients. And this is not me saying, hey, everybody only eat these things. Like that's not it at all. These are just some basic examples. And, you know, again, the point is to like not say, don't eat this, don't eat this, eat this, don't eat this. It's that you can eat whatever you like. You just can't eat everything, because you have to make it fit into like a budget of what energy needs you have. So it's structured flexibility. The biggest reason is that, that I have this in here is looking at some of the things that people might think are protein sources and vice versa. Labeling in the United States is really tricky with a bunch of like rounding rules, and there's all these gotchas and like legal things where like if it's under a certain thing, they can round down and claim this is like entirely free of something. So there's a lot of weird things about
like
that.
half a gram, isn't it?
Yeah,
Half a gram of something.
If it's that, or if it's less than 4 calories, they can say it's 0 calories, things like that. And then they can have, they also manipulate serving sizes to be something that would not be a realistic serving size. So like cooking spray, right, that you buy for a frying pan, the serving size for that is 0 calories, 0 grams of fat for like a 25th of a second spray. So, you know, I don't like try to get a little micro spray. I coat the whole pan, and it's probably, you know, a significant amount of fat, but that's where the labels can be a little bit weird. And I hate that. So yeah, Easy Mac is awesome. Yeah, there's that big calories versus little calories, and that's more of like on the science side, the differentiation. I'm just viewing it as, you know, calories is what you see on the nutrition label. Oh, hot dogs and Easy Mac, that sounds good. So the big one here that I see most common is eggs. People are like, eggs are a protein source. They have protein, but if you look at the amount of energy being provided by fat, it's more from fat than it is from protein. So that's really the big thing I wanted to point out there. So since we talked about timing a little bit, in a perfect world, you would want to have a protein source at every single meal. And if you're doing some type of athletic training, you can have some more right before that training session. And usually that's where something that's faster digesting will help. The reason for that is as you continue to use your body and your muscles and things get sore and tired, having protein in your digestive system will allow the healing process to start immediately. The faster digesting it is, the faster that actually happens. And then carbohydrates, this is where like the idea of processed food can actually be beneficial to martial artists and athletes. You don't want to eat a bunch of things with fiber before you train, number one, because, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, as soon as adrenaline hits you, your digestive system is going to turn off. So all that food that's filled with fiber is going to slosh around inside of you, and that's not fun. So this is a case where like, hey, Smarties and gummy worms and gummy bears like are great things to have around training, because they're going to give you that fast energy. And because you're using your energy systems that are going to take that fast energy, they're not just going to sit there. It's very different than eating candy and then sitting at your desk working, as opposed to having like gummy worms and then, you know, sparring. Like that's a very different situation, because you're going to use that energy right away. And in general, you don't want to have too much fat right around anytime you're training for the same reasons, because your digestion is going to be slowed already from any adrenaline, and that's just not going to supply you with sustained energy throughout whatever you're doing. In the big picture, though, this is not something to worry about before you have your total energy needs taken care of. In general, most people don't need to super fixate on this level of stuff, and it's only like if you're having an issue that needs to be addressed, that's when you kind of want to zoom in on this level and be like, okay, maybe I could do something different timing-wise to troubleshoot this issue. So the timing window, it really depends on what you have and how fast digesting it is. Like after consumption, there's that like misnomer that came from like bodybuilding communities, that if you don't immediately start drinking protein after your workout, you just wasted your time. And, you know, I went back to undergrad in my 30s, and I went to the university gym, and people were eating in the locker room after their workouts. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you like, as long as you're like within like 2 hours or something, you're fine. Like you're still going to get that energy shuttled to your body. And as long as it's like within an hour or two in either direction, you're fine, because we don't digest anything instantly. There's still some delay time in digesting food and things like that. So like if you haven't had a meal 3 or 4 hours before you're doing something activity wise, you're probably going to want to have something before training just to make sure. So 30 minutes, that's pretty much just it's not a hard fast rule. There's no real difference between 30 minutes to an hour. And the only real difference will be in how you feel as a result. So to give you an example, since we're talking about meal timing, and one of the diets we mentioned was intermittent fasting. I currently practice intermittent fasting, mostly because in the mornings, I get up early and I go through work, and I don't want to be bothered with trying to figure something out and clean up after myself. So I push all my meals back. I've fenced, not in a tournament, but I've fenced in class without having eaten anything, and I was fine. One of my students did that, and he looked like he was going to fall over. So that's where, so there's some individual preference as well. And yeah, that 30-minute rule is very common, and that's a lot of time you have these rules. They are really to just obscure the fact of like what the behavior is, which is getting something within a certain reasonable time frame, like an hour or 2 hours. It's the same thing as like don't eat carbs after 7 p.m. The idea is not that like at 7:01 it's like some magical process takes over that carbs are bad after a certain time. It's more so that that's when people are usually eating junk food. So a hard and fast rule helps them be able to do that. So that rule came from people that were trying to be bodybuilders, and like they didn't have big appetites, but were trying to build muscle. So having a hard and fast rule of it has to be within 30 minutes prevents people like that from like forgetting about eating and then just going and doing something else and wondering why they're not actually building any muscle. So like that's kind of where some of these rules kind of come from. It's just hard and fast rules. People tend to understand that better at first, even if like the full explanation is a little bit more nuanced. All right. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. This is much better than just me reading Google Sheet or Google Slides the whole time. So thank you. So yeah, the benefits of gathering objective data is it can help you improve your body composition, your performance, your health, and it gives you control. Now, many people, there's some downsides to that. Some people start to get a little bit obsessive with the data. I'm a total data nerd myself. Like I said, before I worked in nutrition, I was a programmer. Sometimes I like just gathering data for fun. It can cause some overthinking though, and like analysis or paralysis by analysis. I'm certainly guilty of that myself. So there's kind of like the double-edged sword. I had to do it, sorry. So there's like that aspect to it. You just have to be careful of that. So that's the whole idea of like being aware and looking at the data can improve your self-awareness. And it starts to develop underlying patterns of like having a protein goal that you are trying to meet helps you develop the underlying habit of eating protein at every meal, so that you're getting the benefits of recovering from any activities and staying full and getting all the amino acids you need for your cells. So in many ways, these goals serve to like create behaviors. So, and the big thing is, I've seen it with so many people, is this all or nothing mentality where it's like, oh man, I was trying to be good and I ate this one thing and now I just said the heck with it and I'm going to eat an entire bag of pizza rolls. Where it's like, that's really common, but that's all. I've been there myself, and that's really sad because, like I was saying earlier, like what is the point of even like trying to be healthier if you can't have things you enjoy? Because food is not just fuel. It's communication, it's culture, it's pleasure, it's so many things to different people. So it shouldn't be this just like I'm not paying attention to anything, or I'm cutting all the things out that make life, well, not all the things that make life pleasurable, but all the food related things that are pleasurable in life. So, and then actually looking objectively at the data and saying like, am I actually doing what lines up with what my goals are? And we already talked about MyFitnessPal a little bit. There's some other options out there. I'm a MyFitnessPal fan myself. I think it's horrible, but it's the best horrible thing we have because so many people use it. There's entries for everything. There's lots of bad entries, but it's also pretty user friendly too. I used to use just Google Sheets and write stuff down too. And another good one is Chronometer, and that actually has a lot more vitamins and mineral information for people that want to do a deep dive on like, am I getting a lot of vitamins and minerals from my diet? And then honesty and accuracy is the biggest thing. Because MyFitnessPal allows anybody to enter an entry, I've seen things like, Cinnabon cinnamon rolls for 50 calories, right? Yeah, like that's like sniffing it, right? So as long as you're
Sorry.
like, yeah, no, that was the intended result. As long as you're like looking at it like, okay, there's no way that this is 50 calories, right? As long as you're honest with it, then that's really what it's all about.
As far as the pen and paper goes, just as an aside, if you Google, because I know some people do better, like they do better memorization wise when they're writing stuff down.
Yes.
If you Google like food diary templates or like food feedback stuff, like I'll try to find some and post them for you guys. But it makes it easier as far as how you're tracking things.
Yeah, and anything that makes it more straightforward is super helpful. I'm the same way. I have to write stuff down. It just doesn't resonate with me especially at first. So I did the pen and paper route at first until I got into the like mental map of like how I can connect all the dots and make this make sense to me. And then it became like a background process, and then it was time for the app. So the real goal of making changes to eating better is eventually you build those habits by awareness that you don't ever have to like worry about this stuff again. So like I've been doing this for myself for 12 years and I don't even think about it anymore. Like I just automatically go for a protein source the bulk of the time. And my philosophy about that is I do the best I can when I can, so that when I choose not to, it does not matter whatsoever. So like in the aforementioned scenario, somebody's like, Chuck, let's go for pizza. And I'm like, heck yes. And then I ask their stance on pineapples on pizza. And then that could go either way, depending on the crowd. So yeah, and it really is about what we're doing by paying attention to this stuff is mindset, expectations, and then having a structure in place that allows you to not have to think about this stuff, because we are bombarded with ads and headlines that are so misleading that the actual science that we have is pretty straightforward, but that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. All right, we're going to get into lifestyle strategies. Any questions or anything while I take a drink and a pause?
Opinions on fat-free.
Like just in general, like options?
Sure.
Yeah, I think depending on what it is, fat-free butter, no. Something like a fat-free dairy product, I think is totally okay. It's a good way to get calcium and protein without taking in as much calories. One thing that I use is I'll use some fat-free cheeses. By itself, it's pretty horrible, but you can mix it with a regular fat cheese and kind of get the same volume or same amount of food, with just a little bit less fat and a little bit more protein that way. The only thing to watch out for is like, because of the labeling rules we have, fat-free might just mean a product where they found a way to extract the fat. Fat-free can also mean, hey, we replaced all that fat with processed sugar. Enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
that's kind of like where it's the food quality is. Most things like low-fat or fat-free Greek yogurt, cheese, those things are mostly not with added processed sugar. And there's nothing wrong with sugar, but it's like there is a point where too much of anything is not good.
And then how would you define moderation? Because that's the FDA's new favorite thing, right? Everything in moderation, moderation this, moderation that. What is your timeline guidance, I guess, in terms of defining moderation?
That's a great question. My favorite author would probably say moderation is for monks, but I think it really comes down to that pyramid of, if you're making improvements where you want to make improvements and you're focusing on the right things, that's really a personal choice as far as moderation goes. I would never like want to be like, hey, what did you eat? And have somebody say, is that moderation? Because moderation for, I understand what you're asking, like time frame, is it in the context of a day, 2 days, a week, a month? I think that's really just a personal decision. Like for someone, it might be like they try to eat whole foods for the majority of the week, and then they don't do that on the weekends. It might be somebody that does that year round, and then on holidays they don't eat anything resembling a vegetable for like a month. Like it's really a personal choice, but as long as you're managing the things on that pyramid, the net effect to your health is pretty much going to be nothing. Yeah, that's a good point about the eating that much grass. They have 2 stomachs though, right?
Isn't it like 7?
7 stomachs? I don't actually know. That's not my. I don't know much about. You know, it's funny. The
Cows have 4.
4. Okay. The funny thing is, if you look in MyFitnessPal, there are macros for an entire human body. It doesn't say how large the person is, like size, like height or weight, but there is an entire human body in MyFitnessPal. The only reason I know that is that for the company I work for, we have an internal Facebook page for our members, and someone was offended by the fact that there was the calories and macros for a whole human body in there. They were like terrified. So, and Chianti, right? Chianti, however you say it.
Crap, I had a good one and I left. Hold on, I'm gonna think about it. I had it and it left.
Okay. All right, so lifestyle strategies. This is the fun one. So just to be clear, some people may feel called out by this, specific things we're talking about, and that's not the intention at all. You know, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just pointing out what we know from science, and you know, science it's not about feelings. It's just, it is. So again, I'm not being judgmental. I'm just gonna go right into it. So sleep, that's the big one. If you were looking at that pyramid, sleep is the ground that all this other stuff rests on. So we all hear 7 to 9 hours, but less than 7 hours is actually clinical sleep deprivation. So what does that mean? You have a higher chance of all the bad stuff that your body's going to go wrong. Stroke, heart attack, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's. It lowers your immune system. Sex hormones are lowered. The big one that really scared me learning about this was your responsiveness while from driving. If you're clinically sleep deprived, you are more responsive as a drunk driver than when you're a sleep driver.
It's a small deficit too. It's like 2 hours less than you usually get.
Yes. I believe they looked at the reaction times, and the test was someone driving at night, someone was sleep deprived, someone was drunk, and the reaction time between a tractor trailer coming at you in your lane, I believe your like normal response time was like the baseline, and then, you know, a certain blood alcohol content, you had like a 1 or 2 second, 3 second delay. And then the sleep one, if you were sleep deprived, there's something called micro sleeps where you may temporarily fall asleep and not react at all. So it was considered worse than drunk driving.
Yep.
So,
and I think it's sleep deprivation triggers high cortisol.
Yes.
Hormone release, which is your stress hormone.
It causes the imbalance of your cortisol levels throughout the day because there's a cortisol clock that you have that links with your circadian rhythm, so it causes cortisol to become out of whack and overproduced.
Yeah, and so like cortisol in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad hormone. Like you need stress to be able to adapt to it, but it's tightly regulated with your sleep and your sleep schedule. And that, you know, as part of that is also you have less control over emotions. You may become more impulsive. And I view that as like a scale of like the less sleep you get, the more impulsive you become. The benefits of more than 7 hours of sleep, you know, being out of sleep deprivation is improved learning, problem solving, pattern recognition, memory, the ability to move motor skills into muscle memory, which is important for HEMA training, right? Because if you're learning a technique or you're trying to change something or learn something new, moving that into muscle memory is improved with better sleep. And then you have a improved rate of recovery, and it reduces your time to exhaustion. So you can train harder, train longer, and then go back and do it again. And it also helps you deal with stress. Part of that is the emotional control aspect, but the way I kind of describe it is stress kind of feels really sharp when it's overwhelming you, but the more sleep you have, the less sharp it kind of feels, or farther away it feels. So what are some ways that we can get better sleep? So the body loves consistency in everything. So if you've taken biology, you know homeostasis, that's just the body wanted to keep everything the same. And I just to be clear, I'm not somebody that's like the perfect example of these. These are just what we know. A consistent sleep schedule 7 days a week. Super hard when you have a social life. So that's just something that helps, you know, consistent with your sleep, bedtime and wake time. Exercise. I'm going to comment on that in a second. Exercise, but if you exercise too close to bed, it's going to impact your ability to fall asleep. And then limit caffeine and nicotine. I don't smoke, but I do have lots of caffeine running through my system. What I do is I set a cutoff time. My normal bedtime is like 10 p.m. I stop caffeine around noon because it has a half-life of 8 hours. And that means half-life means that it's half effective in that time. So by 8 p.m., the whatever amount of caffeine I have in my system still, it's half effective. And avoid alcohol before bed. That impacts your sleep. And I know that's not always possible if you drink. Like I said, I'm not exactly the paragon of all of these 12 tips, but Peter mentioned that. Does that mean we should switch to morning drinking? Off the record, if you're concerned about it impacting your sleep, yeah, that's probably a better choice, morning drinking.
You still sleep, but instead of going into REM, you stay in the superficial where it's just physical rest. It's not mental.
Yes, so it's a lighter version of sleep. REM sleep is, you can pretty much considering it like defragging your brain's hard drive, where you put things into memory and rearrange them to be more efficient and store things. And you know, you still may physically recover, but not mental recovery. So avoiding large meals and beverages late at night. That's one of those personal ones. Some people sleep better on a full stomach, but the composition of the meal can matter. And then beverages are just so that you're not waking up to go to the bathroom throughout the night. You know, if you have medication that delays or disrupts sleep, you probably want to schedule that with your doctor to be earlier in the day if possible. Napping after 3 p.m. This is a general rule. I know a bunch of people that do better when they nap after 3 p.m. and it doesn't impact their sleep whatsoever. This is one of those cases. You know, these are the rules, but if you know the rules, then you can know when to break them for yourself, because you may be like an outlier to this. And just
the classic, they're more like guidelines.
Yeah. So like, for example, 7 hours is the cutoff for sleep deprivation. There is a very, very rare type of person. There's some genetic determinant where they're called, like, I forget the term, like super sleepers. They can function the same as I would with 7 to 9. They can do that with 5 to 6 or sometimes even less. And then relax before bed. So like what I do is I set an alarm to turn off electronics, because the electronics, the color of the light coming from them tells our brain that it's outside, like it's sunny out, and that we should be awake and thinking. So it's like the idea of turning down the lights, relaxing, no screens, doing something that gets, you know, you to de-stress, get thoughts out of your head. So I read an actual physical book before bed. That usually helps me. For some people that like have insomnia, that's recommended to not do that, but that's just a specific case. A hot bath before bed, and you might be wondering why the hot bath before bed when it says create a bedroom environment that's a cooler temperature. So what a hot bath will do is draw the blood away from your center into your extremities to the surface. And when we say a cool environment, keeping the core of your body colder allows you to fall asleep faster. So sometimes people will sleep without, and these are like, to be fair, these are weird people that are like about extremes of human performance. Like, what little micro changes can I do to push things into like the, you know, the limits of what people can do. So they'll like sleep with like an ice blanket, but wear a hat, gloves, and like wool socks to bed, just so their core temperature is low, but the rest of their body, you know, that's not necessary. Just, you know, if you had good sleep or not. just turn the lights off in your bedroom, leave the phone and computers out of the bedroom, and then find a temperature that's 65 to 70 or something like that allows you to cool down pretty quickly. And then having some sunlight during the day will help you fall asleep later in the evening. And then the big advice that applies pretty much across the board is that if you're sitting there in bed and you're just thinking about stuff and you can't fall asleep, it's better for you to go and get out of bed and do something relaxing to try to start again, as opposed to just staying in bed and worrying about why can't you fall asleep, because that's the thing. Yeah, that's I think that's an anxiety thing, right? Where you're laying in bed and you think about that stupid thing you said and you're wondering if everybody else remembers and if they're thinking about it right now. Yeah, I've been there. So since we talked about stress and cortisol, the idea of stress is subjective. Like, we need stress, and some of it is our perception of what's happening and how we deal with it, but we can do some things that help manage stress a little bit better. So there are positive stresses called eustress. It energizes you, makes you feel good. Physical activity can be a positive stress. Doing something that's an accomplishment, learning. For me, doing this type of thing and talking to everybody here, that's a positive stress. I'd be lying if I said it didn't stress me out, but I feel good doing it, and then afterwards I'll be glad that I did it. So distress, it's that feeling run down, exhausted, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, whatever. And that's when you start to feel the negative effects of, like, everything feels like a cycle of, like, all my decisions suck and I can't sleep and I feel like crap and I'm not recovering, and it just starts to, like, snowball into everything else. So what are some ways we can manage our stress better? Some type of meditation. People tend to view meditation as this secret technique that's unlocked by something, and it really can just be being present. And so there's apps for that, like Calm, Headspace, 10% Happier. I saw a good YouTube video that talked about just paying attention to your breath, and that way it doesn't require an app or anything. It's just taking the time to slow down and focus on one thing that you can control, which is your breath, and just starting to, like, tune out the outside world and just be present. Because I know the times that I've tried, like, structured meditation, the only thing I thought about is, why can't I meditate the entire time? So other things we can do are make sure we prioritize our self-care. I'm a parent, so especially as a parent, it feels really selfish to be prioritizing our self-care. But in the end, all the things we do or want to do in a day are better when we put ourselves first. It's that whole, like, in case of emergencies, put your own oxygen mask on first. That's pretty much what that is. Setting boundaries is a good thing. And along that line, like, saying no as a complete sentence, like, especially with the pandemic and the boundaries of people that are not used to working from home, companies are kind of, like, encroaching on those boundaries. We're like, well, I know you're not going anywhere because we're all stuck inside, so here's some more work. Setting a boundary around, like, look, I need to be able to have some downtime or I can't do what I need to do effectively. And that kind of leads into time management and priorities. So I was a lucky person that I already worked from home full-time 100% of the time. So I was kind of set up for this. But when I first started doing that, I really ran into issues of trying to fill the time, because I lived in my office in a way that I was just letting my workday run from when I woke up until when I went to bed. And that had a bad effect on my mental health in a long enough timeline. So that's important to actually figure out what matters to you to help deal with stress. For me, I'm super analytical, organized, so I have, like, a to-do list where I know what I'm doing on a day broken down into blocks, but that's just me, whatever works for you. And then getting support when you need it. That just might be talking to a friend, somebody you confide in, or, it could be a professional help through, like, a counselor, which is super important, especially, during a time like this. All right. Oh, American Express is offering a free year of Calm. If I had American Express, I'd probably sign up for that. All right. So recovery, how do we recover? And that doesn't mean exercise, that means from everything. Exercise, stress, being alive, dealing with other people. Go to sleep. Don't do too much. If you're just starting to get into being more active, it's really easy to have all this motivation at first and then go hard, and then you get injured and then you're kind of back to square one. So it's got to be paying attention to like a moderate amount. Active recovery is a way that you can do something that anything that's play, that's not super challenging, allows you to move, get your blood pumping, but it's not something that's like, when I say walks here, I'm not saying, all right, I need you to walk for an hour at this pace with this heart rate. I'm saying like, just go saunter around and enjoy nature, like that type of thing. I think the Japanese have a word for it. It's like forest bath or nature bath. If once massage places open back up, get a massage. And then, you know, it comes back to listening to your body. If you know that all the things you're trying to do just feel like you're underwater or you're getting worse at them, you're getting injured, you have nagging aches and pains, not including things like when your shoulder pops all the time, that's a good sign you probably need to rest a little bit more. HRV is on there if you're a data nerd. HRV was initially used, I think, in mental health studies in patients to gauge recovery in response to medicine and heart rate. It's heart rate variability, and it measures the difference between, I think it's in and out of blood valve. So it's just people use it for fitness as like a readiness score, as to, you can look at this score that shows you how ready you are to do something physical. And the things that impact it big time are sleep, caffeine, alcohol, and stress. So you can see, like, if you have the perfect storm of you drank a bunch of caffeine because you had a bunch to do and were stressed about it, and then you drank a bunch of alcohol to de-stress after you went through that, and then you slept poorly, like that score would tank pretty much all the way to the bottom. So the chronic shoulder click, yeah, I have one of those too. I'm not sure what specialist you could see. A chiropractor that actually practices along the border of a physical therapist might be able to help, because chiropractors, some are just about spinal manipulation. I see a sports chiropractor myself for some lingering issues, and they basically, like I said, skirt that line of physical therapy. So one thing you can try for that is just doing like getting the joints moving every day, just some like shoulder circles. That usually helps me. So like I'll get all the clicking out all at once, and then for the whole day it won't click. But that's just something that builds up with time, or can build up from time. But you might want to see if there's like a sports chiropractor or sports specialist that you can look at that will help with that. A lot of that is like sports rehab. Here in Pittsburgh, we have UPMC has a sports rehab facility. So like all of the ballet dancers from the ballet company and all of the sports teams, they go there for any like rehab or injury stuff. Yeah, so if you have, it looks like somebody has some recommendations about some things that can actually help. Yeah, for me, it's just the one shoulder. I'm not sure if it's like a muscle imbalance or something. It's really hard to tell on myself, but. Okay, so if you're a HEMA Strong member, I usually share this every Friday, but if you're not, I'd like to share this with you. Picture a cup of water. This cup represents your intensity, your motivation, your overall readiness. It's like a mental currency. You could also view it as like if this were a video game, like the combination of your health bar and your mana bar. So every time you do something that's like a hard workout, you decide to have cereal for dinner, you don't get your 7 hours of sleep, you're stressed from work, you fight with somebody and it's not like a consensual HEMA sparring fight, you get angry at social media or the news or the internet, you're pouring water out of that cup. But every time you read a physical book, you pet a dog or a cat lets you pet it, you get enough sleep, you have a good healthy meal, you get a hot shower, get a massage, you meditate, you're able to practice HEMA again, that's you filling your cup back up. So this cup is only a certain size. Many people just pour and pour and pour out of the cup, but then the cup runs empty, and then when you need to actually pull from it, there's nothing left. So when we talked about priorities and self-care, if you find yourself being super stressed and you just feel exhausted, like focus on what you rather than focus on what's emptying the cup, look at ways you can actually fill the cup. And as a result of that, you know, you'll be a better person because of it, because you'll be able to do all the things you want to do better. So, any questions on the lifestyle stuff? So this next section is tournament prep, and this is where we're gonna nerd out a little bit about some of the science and recommendations and stuff. All right. So I'm gonna break this down into before. So this is like the week leading up to the tournament. Many people make the mistake that they're gonna hydrate after they started sweating. Like, so, hey, I already fought a match, I should probably drink something, I'm thirsty. Hydration status is something that is days worth of work, staying hydrated multiple days before. If you're already sweating, you're already losing water, especially with those of us that are, you know, wearing a bunch of heavy protective gear. You're going to sweat more, and you're going to, you know, and that's a consideration. But the problem is that hydration is not just water. If you're just chugging a bunch of water to stay hydrated, you're probably losing some electrolytes, which is actually not going to be helpful whatsoever. Your kidneys can only process about 30 ounces an hour. The rest you're just going to pee out, and you're probably going to dehydrate yourself by peeing out all the electrolytes you need. So if you've ever seen HEMA jackets that haven't been washed in a long time, they have that white crust on them. And in most cases, that is salt from people's sweat, I think. The smell is from something else, but the white stuff's generally salt. So that helps with activity levels. It helps your blood flow, your thyroid, your immune system, your liver. Basically, if you don't have enough salt, everything sucks. Now, there are plenty of people that have issues with salt, and that's something you'd want to consult your doctor with. But if you're sweating a bunch and you don't have any issues with blood pressure where you need to like reduce your salt, and you don't eat a bunch of processed food, so like this happens pretty commonly where somebody's like, all right, I'm gonna like eat a bunch of healthy foods, and they exercise a bunch more and they sweat it all out and they feel terrible. They probably just need more salt to keep their blood thicker, and that's kind of like the deficit of salt is a huge problem. So sleep, sorry, I had to mention it. I know it's a sore spot for some of you, but sleep is going to help you be ready. So a big one is, just like most people are not going to be trying out new things like right before the tournament, you're going to focus on your strengths maybe. You probably not a good idea to try a bunch of new foods. So, you know, if it's something you're traveling for and there's a cuisine that's local to whatever location we're in, if you haven't eaten it before and you're competing tomorrow and you really care about being ready to fight, probably not a good idea to try new foods or test your tolerance for spicy foods. So as far as like fueling yourself for the tournament, what you eat for dinner the night before, what you have for breakfast, because of digestion speeds and having a mixed meal, and by mixed meal I mean it has some protein, some fat, some carbs, that the food you have from dinner through breakfast is probably going to it's probably going to be what gets you through most of the day energy wise. And then depending on how much you're actually fighting and being active, you may need to fuel up during. The idea of like carb loading, where you eat like a gigantic bowl of pasta before, probably not a great idea. It's not recommended for runners or marathon runners either, because of the digestion problem. And again, the idea of when you're under adrenaline, that stuff's just going to slosh around in there. And I'll talk some more about that. The big thing is that your digestive system can only process like whatever your basal metabolic rate is. It can only process like up to 2.5 times what that is. So to give you an example of that, you know, if my basal metabolic rate is 2,000, I'm probably not going to get more than 5,000 calories before I'm not getting any more energy from it. And the reason we know that, it's called the alimentary limit, is because humans are now pushing the boundaries of what the body is capable of, We have people that are running cross country, like literally from one coast to the other, and they're doing it day after day after day. And the problem is, how do we actually fuel those people? And at some point, there's a limit where just adding more food does actually nothing. The body cannot process any more energy. So I just wanted to include that because I found that fascinating. So along those lines, choose your fuel wisely before a tournament if it matters for you, because your digestive system is not a garbage disposal. Eating a bunch of food that you're not used to eating, or eating too much with maybe too much salt, you're going to pay for it the next day performance-wise. So 3 priorities during the day of the tournament or days is hydration. These are in order of priority: hydration, avoiding GI upset, and nutrition. So I'm going to dive into those. So as you're sweating more, the more you sweat, the more salt you lose from your blood. So as I said, water alone is not going to hydrate you in general if you're excreting excess sodium, which is more likely to happen in HEMA gear and sweating and things like that. So I'm not a shill for big Gatorade. There are plenty of different options out there. Gatorade's formulated based on what they use to give children IV for diarrhea. So it's actually too much. So whatever you have, you can dilute it. So if you have a scoop is for 12 ounces, you can have double the amount of water to have the actual hydrating effect, because we're not children with diarrhea. You know, we talked about the GI upset. Maybe you have diarrhea, but you're not a child with diarrhea. So we're going to stick with the have solution. You can add some protein powder into that just to keep things moving. Many people do better having liquids throughout the day because they're easy to digest. And if you have that adrenaline dump, you're not having to go through a big energy expensive digestion process. And then having something with calories will keep it in there just a little bit longer. And then a little bit of sugar actually helps get the electrolytes into the blood faster. So like I said, what I've done in the past is combined protein powder and Gatorade, and you know, it was able to just keep me hydrated with enough energy between breakfast and dinner throughout the day. So yeah, we'll talk about GI distress in a minute. So this is looking at the hydration index across beverages. So as you can see, the one that's the tallest in the middle there, right under the word prep, that's that oral rehydration solution, which is just diluted Gatorade, or you can go specific, whatever. In general, you see that like most of the ones that you would expect are pretty much the same as water. And there are things that are actually more hydrating than water, which would be orange juice and milk. And skimmed milk is pretty much second to the oral hydration solution. And I know the idea of like, not everybody can drink milk, right? And also the idea of being super hot and sweaty and drinking milk kind of sounds disgusting to some people. But there's a couple studies that show like chocolate, low-fat chocolate milk is the ultimate performance-enhancing drink you could possibly have. So I'm gonna stop here and answer some of the questions. So John's asking about pickle juice. Pickle juice, it has everything you would need to rehydrate. They actually make a pickle juice you can buy. I think the only concern is like depending on how long your pickles are in there and if you got a fork in there and like just bacteria. But like if you have pure pickle juice, it's probably good enough that you're going to get everything you need. And eating pickles can be a great snack for that as well. So like in general, as long as it's not like a possible source of bacteria, that type of thing, it's probably a great idea if you like the taste. And yes, plenty of people do swear on that, and it takes care of the salt too. Yeah, you can get the sweet and sour pickles, nothing like it. So jerky and dried food for endurance stuff. So to answer that question, and I talk about that actually right on this slide. So for anything that lasts longer than an hour and a half to 2 hours, that's pure endurance. That's when you'd start to look at adding about 25 grams of carbs per hour. You can get a little bit of that from maybe like 5 to 10 grams of fat and protein on top of that. But that's the food choices that you mentioned are perfectly fine. I would even probably favor the fruit over the jerky, maybe a little bit of jerky and more fruit. That's pretty much perfect though. So like that amount. The one thing that I found is really helpful for that type of stuff, and if you look in my cooler bag at HEMA tournaments, because I usually drag my kids with me, is Uncrustables, which are the frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That way you can just buy them in the freezer department, throw them in the cooler, they thaw out, and then you have perfect snack food with no crust. So, all right, so this kind of leads into like the endurance stuff. So endurance is a little bit different than HEMA, simply because it's not a constant. Like we have pools and we reset and things like that. So our needs are not as great as exercising for multiple hours nonstop. So what I like to do is say for every hour of where you're actually active, you want to replace like 1/2 to 1 calorie body weight in pounds. So, you know, for every hour that I'm active, I would probably want to take in somewhere 120 to 240 calories. I'd probably err on the side of more myself, because whatever my goals are outside the day, my day is to just not worry about how I'm feeling and just be able to focus on my fighting. So yeah, so here's some examples. Dried fruit, you can add salt to fruit. That's one of my favorite things in the world. There's nothing like a good watermelon with a bunch of salt on it. Mixed nuts are good. There's the Uncrustables I mentioned, and pretzels are always good too. Whoa, any friend that has Uncrustables in their purse on demand is a good friend. So let's talk about GI upset, since I have a couple people that mentioned that that's not their friend. A lot of the studies we have on ultra marathon runners. So for clarity's sake, an ultra marathon is anything over 50 miles run at once, which to me, I'm not a runner. That sounds insane, but I have a couple friends that have done it. According to the studies we have, of the people that finish, 90% of the people that do that type of stuff have some type of GI upset. And we have some data on why that might be or ways to get around it. If you eat and drink earlier in the day, you have less of a chance of GI upset. So we talked about intermittent fasting. Somebody that's like, I'm not going to eat anything until I'm out of the pools, you have a greater chance of GI upset. If you're underfed, and because food has water, you're probably underhydrated and you probably don't have enough salt, you're more likely to get GI upset. Yeah, 90% of ultra marathon runners have GI upset issues. So if you've ever had GI upset, and GI upset is like an umbrella term for anything where you're like, oh boy, what's happening? Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be running to the bathroom back and forth all day. It could just be any form of like, this doesn't feel good and it's distracting me and something's not right. So what happens is when we exercise, we prioritize whatever our body's doing, and all that blood's going away from the digestive system. So all that food that's in there is not being digested, it's not being absorbed, it's just sloshing around and being jostled. And it's one of those problems that the more we move around, the worse it gets. So in these ultra marathon runners, they tried giving them Gas-X, and that seems to help. Some of the common reasons are eating foods you're not used to, contaminated food environment. So if there's like, for example, at a race, there's a food table where there's like fruit and sandwiches, and it's just people that are sweaty and dirty, and they're reaching in there and grabbing food, and then you're grabbing food, and there's no hand sanitizer. It's just germs everywhere, and some people get GI upset from that. So what can you do is, some of the things we learned from a pandemic is wash your hands really good, carry hand sanitizer with you, bring your own food, or eat stuff that's in a peel or in a package. That's usually a way to keep it safe. So if you have stomach cramps, it's usually because of the lack of blood. You can have an empty stomach and have stomach cramps that feel like you're going to be sick from what you ate without having eaten anything. It's really just a cramp. It's literally a cramp that your stomach does not have enough blood in it. So if you are getting an adrenaline dump and you get stomach cramps, it's because there's no blood in your digestive system. It's being pulled elsewhere to your body for performance. All right, and I have a question. So my first and only tournament so far was a little mess. You know, we can dig into that a little bit. If you'd like to provide me specifics, we can do it here, or you can message me after.
I can do it here because everyone knows what I have because I'm very vocal about it.
Okay.
My entire life is just this issue. If I can find my mouse. I have IBS.
Okay.
So every day is a roulette of how my stomach's gonna be.
Okay.
And it's brought on also by a lot of anxiety and stress. And so, of course, I am stressed at my blitzen mind that day. So I took some medicine and it did absolutely nothing. And I think between every single bout of fighting, I ran to the bathroom. So is there something in these preps that I can do to relieve any stomach distress like this?
That's a tough question. I know how much that sucks. I sometimes have some IBS-like symptoms. I'm not like officially diagnosed, but I've been there. I get that from anxiety myself. I'm not sure if it would be best approached from like a food or nutrition.
So I'm on the low FODMAP diet.
Okay.
On my gastro's discretion. It helps most of the time. But there's just some days, for whatever reason, because I have IBS, it does whatever the hell it wants.
Yeah, that's
so
tough.
there's not a lot of stuff I can do on a daily basis. But when times like this, do you have suggestions on things to ease or work around it?
I'm also curious because my husband just believes in fasting for 24 hours to manage the only thing that works for him right now.
I've heard a lot of good anecdote about fasting as far as that helps, and really, so I would say, like, I'm familiar with low FODMAP diets. I'm just wondering if maybe even getting it down to just cutting out anything that has. So I'm not sure if you use the Monash app to like look at the actual FODMAPs.
No, I have an app that tells me what things are low FODMAP and high FODMAP, and by this point, because I've had it my entire life,
yeah,
I know more or less what I should be avoiding.
Okay. This is not a free app. So Monash is an Australian university that developed the guidelines for low FODMAP eating. And so their app, it's kind of Eurocentric in that it has like weird foods that are not in the US. So some foods there's not a lot of carryover, you know, like digestive biscuits, right? Stuff like that. Instead of it just being like red or green, certain foods in certain amounts are shown in the Monash lab to cause issues. So for example, there might be a food that's greenlit as being low FODMAP, but beyond a certain threshold, it becomes a high FODMAP food.
I've noticed that a lot, yeah.
Yeah, so that app actually lets you drill down. So if that's something where you're kind of like, okay, I know that I'm not going to be, or you know you're working through your anxiety over tournaments, which is normal, right? And that's a factor. Maybe looking at only doing foods that are safe in unlimited amounts. And I realize it sucks to like limit yourself even further.
I'm used to it.
Yeah, that might help as far as that goes. And some people that I've worked with that have IBS, they're looking for like certain proteins were even causing them distress. There's a supplements company called True Nutrition, and they have some of the most allergy and FODMAP friendly mixtures because you can pick your sources. So you could go with like, I think the one that worked for someone I was working with from NIFA, we went with an egg white protein powder.
Oh yeah, protein powders. I've tried several. Every single time it made me vomit or want to vomit.
Like from taste or texture or both, or just
mixture of all of it?
Okay. Yeah, that you know, that might be something to try, because I think you can even get them unflavored, and that way you can just like put them in coffee or something.
If I can get something like Benefiber for protein, I'm set.
Yeah, with how well it mixes, that's
Yeah.
the dream. Yeah.
You should invent that.
Well, I'm not a food scientist, but if I knew someone that was, I would certainly suggest that. But yes, that's probably what I'd recommend looking at, is going a little deeper on foods that are safe in any amount, and cutting back or eliminating temporarily the foods that are only safe up to a certain threshold. So that way you're eliminating variables and seeing if that makes a difference.
Okay. Thank you.
That's interesting though, because it kind of opens the conversation topic of food intolerances versus food allergies too.
'Cause I have both.
Yeah.
I have some intolerance. I started having these weird issues where like my joints would hurt after certain meals, and then I'd be running to the bathroom, and I did all the food tests, and they're like, no, there's nothing. So I just had to I did low FODMAP for a while, and it helped. I felt better for a while, and then I just got really low energy from the lack of variety. And I just started adding things back in to like pinpoint it. And like I mentioned cauliflower earlier, because that was my personal experience. Like if I eat cauliflower, my stomach just bloats up, my joints hurt, and I have to run to the bathroom like immediately, which is sad, because they're finally making cauliflower into like better things than cauliflower, like, you know, different concoctions that are including cauliflower, but it is what it is.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So, and yeah, if you have any questions about that app, I think I might there was something on, there's like the low FODMAP thing on Reddit too, that has a guide they were updating for a while, where it's like basically like, here's all the information from the Monash app in a spreadsheet, and they had to like manually update it. I'm not sure if they're still doing it or not, but that might help too. Okay, so we were talking about ways to lower, or this part is looking at with athletes that had lower GI upset, what were some of the commonalities? They had food and they had hydration earlier in the day. That was a commonality. They had a little bit of fat going on with their food to help with digestion, just a little bit. So that might be like some peanut butter. They had normal meals. They didn't try any new foods. They didn't use any like processed foods like runners and endurance people use like gels. There were no like processed protein bars, none of that stuff. Because that's where you start looking at the idea of intolerances. Is like some people don't do very well with like sugar alcohols or fake sugars. Like that's kind of playing into that, where in many cases in your normal life, these things may not bother you. But when you add in the stress of competition and nerves and anxiety, some of these things just kind of, their effect is a little bit greater. So in general, the recommendations are drink early, eat often, 30 ounces of liquids. Any more than that and you're just peeing out your salt. And then, you know, at least don't go low fat earlier in the day, because you want to have that food in your system for digestive purposes. You know, the goal is not to just load up on fat early on, but just get some, as opposed to like going zero fat or the extreme of going all high fat. So if you have GI upset, it's recommended that you not do fasted training. However, like Marlene said, some people are able to manage GI upset better with fasting. And that's everything that I have. So this is just kind of my like, hey, join HEMA Strong and say hi. And we sell t-shirts and stuff. And then that's my email address if you wanted to ask me specific nutrition questions. And like I said,
I'm also just
go ahead.
Throwing out there that HEMA Strong is one of the most positive HEMA groups out there, as far as like being open to literally anyone and everyone that does HEMA. They do a great job moderating. They do a great job making sure that the advice is sound, that they're tagging the right people so you get the best advice. Like, if you haven't joined already, do it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So this is the opportunity to ask me anything. Like I said, I talk about all kinds of fun body stuff all day long, so I don't really have any TMIs. So any questions you have, it doesn't have to be just nutrition. If you want to ask me training stuff while I'm here, that's totally okay too. So I'll take any questions at all.
So you said you went back to undergrad. Is that what your nutrition certification came from? You have an undergrad?
No, I have an undergrad in information systems, and then at the same time I did a bunch of certifications on the side.
Cool. I was curious because I have a few sitting on the back burner that I'm trying to do.
Certifications?
Nutrition wise, yes.
Yeah. Well, which ones are you looking at?
I'll have to double check. I'll send you the stuff.
Okay.
Like I'll get with you offline, but I was curious because I don't know, the nutrition science area is kind of weird where like if you have an undergrad but didn't do an internship, you're a nutritionist. But if you did an internship and passed your exam, you're a dietitian.
Yeah. They actually just changed that. My boss is actually a registered dietitian, and she taught the RD program at the University of Scranton for many years. I actually talked to her about me potentially doing that, and she said that they're really changing the requirements where it's like so many curriculum hours under certain subjects, and then you have to do a residency like doing medical nutrition, like probably at a hospital or something like that.
That sounds so cool. Okay.
Yeah. So the difference between what I do and then like what my boss would do. So I have coworkers that are nutrition coaches like me, and then I have ones that are registered dietitians. So if somebody comes to us with a specific goal, the people that go to a registered dietitian are like certain medical conditions that require extra consideration. So pregnant, breastfeeding, certain things with heart, any recent operations, anybody that has burns or anything like that, they require some medical nutrition, which is like outside of the bounds of what I can do. But at the same time, if like I have questions about specific stuff that's on the edge of that boundary, I can use them as a resource too, which is nice. So John is asking about age as a factor in the studies. As far as GI upset, no, their age was not looked at as a factor. It's kind of interesting. A lot of the times when you look at traditional sports, people kind of age out of them, but with ultra marathon runners, and there's no predictor for like, this person looks like an elite ultra marathon runner that can run like 100 miles in a day. Like they actually tend to be older as far as that goes. So for like hydration and diet, things do not really change too much on age. As we age, some of our sex hormones down ramp, and that results in a little bit slowed metabolism. And if we're not paying attention to, doing some type of resistance training, the biggest thing that tends to happen, can you clarify, John?
Sorry, there was a joke about your last comment about certain hormones off ramp.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I missed that one. Right over my head. No, so we tend to lose muscle mass as we get older, and our metabolism kind of down ramps. So our energy needs might become a little bit lower every year. And the best thing you can really do is just, as long as you don't have any kidney issues, maintain not higher, but just get more protein than a standard American diet, and do some type of resistance training. And that will keep your metabolism thriving throughout. So for younger kids, I'm a parent myself. Both my kids my son's turning 9, my daughter's turning 12. For nutrition, we don't really try to push anything specifically. My philosophy is, as long as you give them good choices, you can let them self-select a bunch of different things without like impacting their relationship with food. So for like my kids, we'll have like things like Greek yogurt and like some cheese sticks and cut up fruit and veggies. Oh, in the context of HEMA, honestly, the same things would apply. I don't think it would matter as far as energy needs, because they'd pretty much be the same. But again, kids are still growing and having a faster metabolism, so their needs might be, yeah, exactly. They can pretty much do anything. But in that case, I would say just make sure they're eating protein at every meal and having it, some fruits and veggies. And then pretty much when we talked about, we have a little bit of a window for discretionary calories, it's like the reverse, right? They have a little bit to get their needs, and their discretionary calories are like this simply because their metabolisms are thriving and they're growing. so much at a rapid pace. So they have a little bit of leeway. And that's where you get people that are like, I used to be able to eat anything when I was a kid. Well, like, yeah, so could everybody. You're welcome.
How do you combat food and not intolerances? Aversions, sorry.
Like aversions due to taste, texture, things like that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really think there's no foods you have to eat. So if there's foods or textures you don't like, then just don't eat them. Like as far as like for optimal health, there's plenty of different options. And then like if you're looking at like what's optimal for health is getting fruits and vegetables from like each color, 1 serving a day. So if there's certain vegetables you don't like, then maybe eat a fruit from that same category. And the reason for that is they're grouped based on what nutrients, micronutrients they provide. So as long as you're getting those nutrients from that group, it doesn't matter if you don't like any of the other options. Does that clarify?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna turn my fan on really quick because I think my smart home thermometer realized no one's moving in the house and it started turning the air conditioning down. So I'm starting to get really warm. So. Okay. Hopefully that doesn't impact you being able to hear me. So a question on protein intake. So that's a great question. Yes, the fitness industry, bodybuilding community says 1 gram of protein per body weight for everybody across the board. The medical community is concerned with what is like the amount needed to survive, not particularly what is optimal and what you need to thrive. And a lot of those recommendations, like there's no study that shows somebody with already functioning kidneys having any issue with obscene amounts of protein. Everybody's able to process them. If you're already susceptible due to genetic reasons or have kidney issues, then that's when you'd probably want to look at the lower end of protein and probably not even need to look at it just to make sure you're not getting too much. It's really because a lot of medical recommendations are based on averages, where the average person in America is like, 5'9", 200 pounds. And that's so right in the middle that it doesn't really apply to the bulk amount of people. That's like, none of us is the average person, right? Except for the people that are 5'9", 200 pounds on the call. But you know what I mean? So the medical is like, what is the nutrition for medical reasons, not what is optimal for somebody that's active and has a good amount of muscle mass. So that's like the average American and the standard American diet are just for the person that doesn't really exist and they're not active or doing anything that they need more muscle mass for. Hopefully that kind of clarifies. So training wise, you should be able to twice your body weight on leg press. We have some body weight standards and like big lifts like squat, bench press, deadlift benchmarks on the HEMA Strong website. Those are really just general because everybody has different anatomy as far as like their bones. So, I'm 6'2" and I'm mostly made out of leg bones. So certain things for me are like not mechanically optimal. So much like the recommendations earlier on for nutrition, exercise stuff is just like a starting point, and there might be reasons why like getting to a certain body weight times X on a certain exercise might not even be realistic or even a good idea for somebody based on, their own situation. Because like for me, being able to do a leg press, it has to travel like, 4 feet as opposed to somebody that's, 4'11" or something, then it's a much different exercise. So that's we have them and they're general, but that's why I'm hesitant to be like, this is the law. Like they're just some general recommendations. Think of it more as like by going on the journey towards them, the value comes in the improvement process, not the end goal. You're welcome. So hypoxic or anaerobic training. That training modality is anaerobic, means without oxygen, and that's the energy system that uses carbohydrates as the prime fuel source. So what that means is short bursts of energy. So you could think of fencing as anaerobic, and it is essentially doing something for a short burst of time, and then resting, and then going back at it again. So you can pretty much, sprinting would be another idea. So you can pretty much maintain activity up to 2 minutes max. So other than that, you switch over to a lower energy state or aerobic. So I'm getting to the answer in your question. I just wanted to give the right context. Much like we have the pyramid for nutrition, there's the pyramid for training. And so there's these like fitness domains, much like we have like in medieval manuscripts, like the qualities of a fencer, like Fiore has the segno, however you pronounce it, with the audacity and courage and strength. We have those attributes, and they're in a pyramid. So aerobic fitness actually recharges your anaerobic training. So what I recommend in general is have a solid aerobic base before you worry about the anaerobic, because what happens is with a solid aerobic base, which in plain English is boring cardio that you do for like an hour, right? And it's kind of like not intense enough that you can still talk during. That's your recharge on your anaerobic system. So the way you improve the anaerobic system is just upping the intensity and duration of while you're doing it. So for most people, if you were to come to me and say, Chuck, I want to improve my fencing and my anaerobic endurance during it, what do you recommend? I would say verify with data that you have a solid anaerobic base, and that means you can maintain an hour of physical activity with a certain heart rate, and then just practice the thing that is your anaerobic training. So many people go right to be like, all right, to improve your fencing, do high intensity intervals. And that's kind of not working on the gas tank before you dive into the specifics. So my philosophy is, if you are already fencing and that's anaerobic for you, work on your aerobic base and then let your anaerobic activity improve itself, as opposed to trying to improve the anaerobic activity with another method, because some of that is going to be skill-based too. Hopefully that wasn't too rambly, and if that doesn't answer your question, let me know. Okay, so TLDR is, I'm not a big fan of high-intensity interval stuff to improve fencing, if that was the context, simply because the high-intensity stuff has higher chance of injury. We already are dealing with higher chance of injury with fencing and weapons, so it's kind of like just picking the most effective way to do something with the least amount of time investment. All right. Any studies on actual calories consumed by sorting? Yes. Someone did a heart rate monitor study at Long Point 2016, and they were supposed to release the data, and then they graduated college, and then they didn't release the data. So, but the general results, like the summary of the results, was that fencing is pretty much the equivalent of like weightlifting, as far as that goes. So it's highly anaerobic, and that's kind of why I answered Charles's question as if we were asking about, is like, I basically answered it as like any guidelines for getting better at fencing endurance that way. So in general, I would say it's probably closer to like track and field calories as opposed to like running, because running is constant, right? And you're constantly having to supply fuel. Your energy systems recharge between fencing matches and between pull bouts, and then, you know, that type of stuff. It's really tough to put an actual number on it, but it's pretty much in line with anything else that would be anaerobic or interval based. It just depends on the intervals. Like if you're, I guess it would be what FNY rule set, where it's like 3 exchanges right in a row with like no rest, and then that's it. You know, that type of thing. How much horrible, boring cardio do you actually need? So if you just want to increase your aerobic base, and the good news is that the answer is the same for increasing your aerobic base and for health. And it really doesn't need to be any more than like 3 hours a week. our bodies adapt best and our heart adapts best with duration, not intensity. So 3 hours, or even if it was like 30 to 40 minutes 3 times a week, that's all you need to build the base. But that's not saying you need to do that forever. Like if you are noticing, so the way I view it is like, I'm not saying everybody go do X amount of days of boring cardio forever. The idea is like, is that a deficit? Do you find yourself winded during class? Do you find yourself winded during sparring exchanges and you're not recharging as fast as other people? That's probably where I'd say, okay, let's focus on your aerobic cardio, build that base up with 3 sessions a week, building up from like 15, 20 minutes up to an hour. Once you have that and it feels easy, your anaerobic activity is enough to maintain that aerobic base. So I mentioned briefly the idea of periodization, which was changing approaches in a cyclical fashion, like on a schedule, so that you're focusing on one thing at a time. That's similar where you can say, all right, I'm going to focus on my aerobic base. All right, my base is built. It's on maintenance now, and I can maintain it with 1 day of cardio a week. And just fencing and doing daily life stuff will help maintain it. So hopefully that answers your question. So the answer is, if you are bad at cardio, 3 times a week, and then when you're good at it, you don't have to do it as much.
I feel like so many non-runners just took a huge sigh of relief.
That said, if it's something you enjoy and you want to keep doing it, go for it, because it's still good for you. Yeah, trail running is awesome. I know the times when I've tried trail running, it was like I could do this all day, where as opposed to like 5 minutes of like running in a park, I'm like, all right, this sucks. Yeah, biking, rucking is another great one. So as far as what intensity, so if you have a heart rate monitor, like a fitness watch or anything like that, aerobic would be like zone 2. It's based on your age to get your like optimal heart rate. There's a much easier way to do it, and it's the talk test. If you can talk during it, you're fine. That's where you should be. And you could feel your heart being elevated a little bit. If you're having trouble talking, you're going too hard. And that's usually where people that try to increase their aerobic fitness go wrong. They like start running at full blast, right? And I know that I probably have some bias about hating running because I tried it and I went too high intensity and my knees hurt and I got shin splints and my feet hurt and my back hurt and I was winded and it sucked because I was just going too hard. And the biggest thing that to tell people is just slow down. Like it's not a race. Like you're not racing. It's more of a yeah, exactly. Like a cadence just helps you kind of get into a flow, and it's just something that you can kind of turn your brain off and you can talk and all that type of stuff. Yeah, because if you can't sing and you can't talk, then you're going too hard or you're going too fast. That's one of the things we do with our warm-ups. We shout loudly, like the counting, simply because we want people talking. And if they're having trouble talking, then I know that I'm very critical about making sure that the warm-up is a warm-up and not a workout, because I would rather people get warmed up and focus all their energy on their fencing and their techniques and all that fun stuff, as opposed to like the warm-up being a workout. So if you're not able to like keep up with the cadence or the shouting, then we probably need to bring it down the intensity a little bit, just so that it's doing the thing of getting your blood pumping and getting you warm for actually fencing.
That's interesting. I'd never thought of it that way. So with that in mind, I guess, how do you structure your classes so there's still a workout, even if the rest of it is going to be relatively light intensity? Do you then amp up your warm-ups, or?
So what I try to do is sometimes we'll have a class that the purpose of the class is more of a workout, and I'll be clear up front like what we're doing that day, and that can be just things where our standard warm-up, which has some push-ups, some body weight squats. We'll do some shoulder manipulation, joint manipulation stuff with the sword in hand, some twisting exercises with the core with the sword. And then we'll do some things where we essentially not run, but move through the guard positions, back and forth, forward and backwards. And then we'll do some cutting exercises, and then we'll take a break. And then we kind of, depending on the nature of the class, that's usually 20, 30 minutes right there. And then we'll spend about 40 minutes to an hour on a specific technique. And then I usually just, our classes are 2 hours for longsword. And then we'll open it up to either a sparring game or some type of, like capture the, slay the giant, or like capture the king of the hill. That's right. Sorry. Something like that, or just some open sparring. And then people can get as much or as little out of it as they want to, depending on the day. Sometimes we'll do workouts instead of class, where we'll do the standard warm up, and then it'll just be like cutting practice, or sometimes we'll do circuits, things like that. Like, for example, a circuit would be like a punching bag, a martial arts dummy, a Pel, and you just rotate between the circuits in a fashion, things like that.
Thank you. Awesome.
You're welcome. Yeah, and the reason I changed that is when I first joined Broken Paw, it was like some of the classes were like so much warming up that people were gassed by the time they got to the technique stuff, and nothing was getting retained in muscle memory. It was sloppy. So I stepped in and was like, we should probably do better because we can. Yeah, I like the idea of laughing while running. It just kind of helps bring the, a lot of times our expectation of how bad running is going to be is worse than the actual running. And I'm guilty of that myself, for sure. But I do think that if the idea of going on a treadmill or anything like that is boring, there's nothing like just loading up a heavy backpack that's well balanced and going for a hike with it. That's something you can really kind of enjoy with, because the idea is with upping the intensity, the additional weight will increase the heart rate, and it doesn't feel like you're moving faster to get the heart rate up. Yeah, treadmill is a good way to put that. Whew. I can't believe that's been 2 hours already.
You've been killing it.
Thank you. All right, any other questions about anything at all?
I guess not. If there's no other questions, we'll let you go. Thank you very much, Chuck, for your time. And yeah, I guess we'll have an after party here.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for having me. It was a lot of fun. And if you are not a member of HEMA Strong and you don't want to join, but you have questions, you can just hit me up on Facebook Messenger. I'm happy to talk about this stuff because I do it all day. But if you also want to post questions in the group, that's cool too. And I'll make sure I get the slides over so you can share them within your group. So thanks everybody.
Cool. Thank you, Chuck.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Chuck. You too.
Take care. Talk to you soon.